I'm Jerry Herbert. I'm the chair of the library committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to not only David Roper and his wonderful book, but also to a new program that we are starting this summer, and we, meaning our committee, hopes to continue throughout the year, and it's called Annisquam Reads, which is kind of an umbrella term for not only a book and the author coming to discuss the book with us, but perhaps some smaller book discussion groups as well. So we're kind of formulating how that's all going to work out. In the meantime, I hope you will go to our website, which is annisquamvillagelibrary.org. And we have book reviews there. We tell about the events that are going on. And I have to say that tomorrow afternoon is the last story hour for the young children. And we started that at the beginning of July with 4 children. And last week we had 13 young kids. And it's just been a treat. So it's from 4 to 5. If any of you want to stop in, it really is a delight. And the nice thing too is that it is opening the library to the young adults who are the parents of these children, and acquainting them with the library and who we are and what we do. So, we're welcoming David Roper, who has written this wonderful book called Watching For Mermaids. And it's a memoir. It's a series of stories, which he will tell you more about, of cruising throughout his life. You live in Marblehead, Dave? So he came down with his wonderful wife, Mary Kay, who is right there. And frankly, I'm going to read just from the bottom of the back of your book, which has a nice little synopsis. David's been a captain of a Mississippi River stern-wheel cruise ship, a yacht delivery skipper, a long-time Maine coast cruising sailor. His writing has been published in 18 languages. He lives in Marblehead with his wife and 2 children, and is the founder of A Script, a resume writing and career advisory firm. And I'm going to take the liberty of reading a small piece in the book that really struck home to me. He writes, "To me, cruising has been about escaping our often predictable daily lives. It's a controlled adventure, an experience of hope, expectation, surprise, and reward. Try it sometime. Unplug everything and go. Commit to this." And as Goethe wrote, quote, "A whole stream of events will issue from this decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man could have dreamed would have come his way. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it." I give you a bold fellow.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to have my lovely wife here. I didn't think that was going to happen as of this morning, because last night, after I finished a novel by Louise Erdrich called The Rose, in my dreams I was playing volleyball, because there's a volleyball scene in that. And I wasn't doing very well in the volleyball team. I was missing everything, and somebody said, "Roper, spike it, spike it." So I spiked it. In the middle of the night, 3:30 in the morning. No one was hurt. My dreams get a little out of hand. What I'd like to do is read a couple of short pieces, and then entertain any questions ranging from writing process to how many of these stories are fiction and how many are not, to some of the some of the trials and tribulations of getting a book together. People seem to have a range of questions, but I thought a good way to start would be, especially after Jerry's nice introduction about cruising, about a scene from the 1950s that some of you who have read the book have read this, but it's a nice piece to read aloud, and it's called "When No One Else Is Watching." As we rounded the point, the fog came right back. Just then I caught the first smell of spruce and felt the warmth of the land. Despite the fog, I looked for the entrance of the cove, eager to end that day's foggy sail into an unrelenting southwest headwind. Soon I could do my favorite things, some rowing in the old skiff, and then exploring a calm new place. The old cruising guide says the entrance is hard to spot, between the cliffs just beyond this point. It says we should look for a bold pink granite cliff on the eastern side, my father said. I watched Dad now. I looked at him only for intent, not with fear or anxiety. My father would not make a mistake. Grab that red cardboard megaphone behind the port bunk, will you, pal? My father asked. We'll make our own radar. I dove into the cabin, grabbed the megaphone, and handed it to my father, who put it to his lips. Boom! 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 He shouted through the megaphone at different intervals and in slightly varied directions. He waited and did it again. Curious, I watched intently. Seems as if the much longer return echo is right about there, he said, pointing into the fog while looking down at the binnacle. About 20 degrees. He let go the staysail sheet and the old wooden cutter slowed appreciably. We'll just ease on closer and listen very carefully for the surf, he said. Why don't you take those sharp eyes and good ears of yours up to the bow and put them to work? And so we ghosted in toward the entrance. I hung to the forestay, my left foot resting on the bowsprit, while I unleashed my full senses of sight and sound. Then I spied it. There, Dad! There! There's the pink cliff! Just like you said! Just like you said, Dad! He was probably immensely relieved, though he didn't show it outwardly. I'm sure he was nowhere near as certain of himself as I was of him. And there were more worries to come. Come get the lead line for me, will you, pal? He asked as we slid through the entrance. I came aft, grabbed the lead line from the stern locker, unwound it to 3 knots, which I knew meant 3 fathoms, or 18 feet, and moved forward dutifully to just aft of the starboard running backstay. Okay, begin your swings, Dad said, and I swung the lead forward in the water and let it drop as the cutter moved ahead. No bottom, I said, and I swung again. Still no bottom. All good, Dad said, as we eased by the bold shore with the pink granite cliff. We're almost in. About 100 yards farther and we should be inside the cove, and you'll pick up the bottom on the lead line. When you do, I'll round up and we'll drop anchor. Several hours later, when the fog lifted, we were surprised to find that we were not alone. A large cabin cruiser was anchored not far off. Dad seemed surprised. Since we'd left Massachusetts, we'd seen very few big powerboats at anchor in remote coves. He began reheating a beef stew that we'd had the night before. I was happy to climb into the rowing skiff and explore the shoreline. Rowing back from the other side of the cove, my curiosity got the better of me. It got the better of the neighboring cruiser. A large man was sitting in the stern, his feet propped up on the transom. He was smoking a cigar and drinking a beer. I thought the better of getting closer, but as I turned, the man stood up and looked in my direction. Hey, boy! Know where we are in here, boy? We kind of stumbled in here as the fog started. Been stuck in here for a couple of days. It's called Head Harbor, I said. It's on the chart. My dad brought us in here right through that fog. Right in. He knows the place. Thanks, the man said, and settled back in his chair. After dinner, I went below decks to read, and my father, after cleaning the dishes, sat up on deck with a cup of tea. It was dusk and very quiet. Then came a rustle of small objects and a series of small splashes. The noise came from the direction of the other boat in the cove. Dad turned and watched as the man on the powerboat dumped his trash over the stern into the still waters of the pristine harbor. "I'm going for a short row, pal," Dad said. He put down his tea by the rail, and he slid over the side into the skiff. Very deliberately, he rowed toward the other boat in the cove. As he got closer, the man in the stern took notice. Pretty quiet in here. He sat up straighter, stopped leaning back in his chair, and then he took his feet down from the boat's transom. He put down his beer, then he put down his cigar. But Dad slowed the skiff and turned before reaching the cabin cruiser. He was about 60 feet off, near the slowly spreading pool of garbage. Then he shipped his oars and began to pick the various pieces of the jetsam out of the water. Carefully, slowly, he picked up a soup can with its ragged lid partially attached, a cardboard egg carton, 4 beer bottles, a coffee can, and numerous candy bar wrappers. He placed each item in a canvas bucket in the stern of our skiff. The man on the cabin cruiser watched, motionless, at full attention. I watched, motionless, at full attention. Dad rowed slowly toward the man. In the stillness of the cove, no one said a word. The only sound came from the skiff's old ash oars as they sliced the water and pulled toward the man's boat. Dad rounded up the skiff nicely alongside the cabin cruiser's stern. Then he stood, bucket in hand, and he poured its contents at the man's feet. "I think you may have dropped this," was all he said, and then he rode away. They say that character is what you do when no one else is watching. In this case, a young boy watched. So did an older man. Neither, I venture, has ever been the same. So that's that piece. I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit about the evolution of this book. That's actually me in the 50s in the fog from an old photograph that we found, I think, after my dad died, right, honey?
Yeah, your mom.
He always stood like that in the cockpit of the old wooden cutter, and I'm really trying to mimic him. He always put his arm around the boom, and I started writing this. The first story in this book that I wrote is the last story in the book, and it's the story called The Last Sail. And I wrote that when I was in my late 20s, when I went into a nursing home and experienced that world. And I thought it would be a really poignant piece about elderly people in nursing homes and about a grandson trying to get his grandfather out for a last sail. And then over the years, over the next 30 years, I wrote and published a number of pieces. And the hardest part of putting this all together was figuring out the order of the stories and how to make any kind of theme. And I put together about 15 years ago what I thought was a good proposal on this book, and a publisher offered to buy it, and I said okay. Didn't take any money yet, and I couldn't get it together. I just couldn't make it work. And finally, through a number of iterations, it came together, and it was broken down into the sections that you'll see in the book. In my late 20s, I ended up stepping into a Mark Twain experience, which was really a strange occurrence, but it allowed me to get together some of the Mississippi River pieces that are in this book, and it also allowed me to meet a indelible character named Big Red. And I'd like to read a story called Big Red and Rounding the Bend, because it's about a part of the world that a lot of people are not particularly familiar with, and that's the world of the hard-scrabble Mississippi River towboat pilot. And so this is called Big Red and Driving the Bend. The year I met Big Red, I was living alone in an ark under a bridge in St. Paul, Minnesota, on the upper Mississippi River. Dave's ark was a 42-foot home-built steel houseboat which, due to its ancient and long ago seized up Ford 302 engines, never went much of anywhere. But that was okay, because I spent most of my waking hours running a 135-foot stern-wheel cruise ship along the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. On the rare Saturday evenings I had off, I would climb over a tired security fence on the shore beside my houseboat, ascend the more than 100 rusty steel stairs that led to the top of the Wabasha Street Bridge, walk across the span of the Mississippi, and stand outside the World Theater with the tall, shy man in a white suit. Together, we would try to muster in enough people to generate audience noise for his local radio show. The year was 1978. The show was called A Prairie Home Companion, and the tall, shy man was Garrison Keillor. Later, he got real famous. I didn't. But that's okay too, because in watching and listening to his mesmerizing monologues, I truly learned to appreciate the art of storytelling. After one particular show, and after an earlier incident on the river I'll never forget, I walked back across the bridge, but I didn't descend the stairs to my houseboat as usual. Instead, I continued on to a river bar called Awada's. I was still jittery from what had happened that morning, and I thought a drink or two might calm me down. At this point, I didn't know many of the river pilots, as I was a new transplant from the ocean and considered just a cub pilot, green, newly licensed, and still learning the river. I functioned in a make-believe, tourist-focused world, driving a recreated Mississippi River sternwheeler and narrating with authority about a river I knew little about. As a sternwheeler captain, I wore a uniform designed by the cruise ship's marketing department and calculated to radiate authority and a sense of command. It consisted of white boat shoes, blue pressed slacks, a belt with a big brass buckle showcasing a Mississippi sternwheeler, a white shirt with 4 gold bar epaulets, and a name tag that proclaimed Captain. Thank God there was no hat. Believe me, I never wandered too far off the ship in this getup. And the very last place on earth I would ever go in this rig was the world of Awada's Riverfront Tavern, the domain of the hard-scrabble commercial towboat pilots, whose uniforms consisted of what was closest to them on the floor when they got up each morning. Towboats, by the way, actually push rather than tow barges, and what they and their pilots do is extraordinary. Their emotions on the job fluctuate between complete boredom and total terror. Pushing barges with 1 million gallons of gasoline through steel bridge spans in a fast-running river in the middle of a city in the dark of night is not for the faint of heart, especially when the bow or the head of the tow can be a couple of football fields in length ahead of you. In fact, the largest tow ever pushed on the Mississippi River is 8 barges long by 4 barges wide. That makes a 1,600-foot ship with a 200-foot beam on a narrow river. So the next time that you think you're hot stuff, docking your 30-footer with your bow thruster, think again. So I wandered into the smoke-filled darkness of Awada's in my jeans and t-shirt, took a seat at the bar and ordered a grain belt beer. Before long, 4 men came in and grabbed a round table just behind my bar seat. I stole a glance at them over my shoulder, but the big one, the one with the big red beard, caught my eye. "Hey," he said in a deep, gravelly voice, "I seen you from my pilot house today. Can tell it's you there, Cubby, even without your little Captain America outfit on." You're that new one running that silly paddle boat that looks like a giant wedding cake, ain't you? I stopped to wave over the waitress, then continued. He stopped to wave over the waitress and then continued. Passed you kind of tight in Monkey Rudder Bend while we was pushing a couple empties down from Lock 1 this morning. Another few feet, I could have squished you down through that Mississippi River mud right to China. Maybe you happen to notice me. Yeah, you're off the Sadie Mae, I said, and that's why I'm drinking in here. And that mud you mentioned was in my Captain America pants when I came around the bend with my 300 Taurus and found you and your 400 feet of barges bearing down on us, taking up most of the river. Yeah, I was driving that bend with them barges there, Cubby. Some guys, they'll back a bend instead of driving it. Let the current pull their lead barges through while they're backing slow against it to try to get control. He looked over at the other 3 pilots at the table, and they all smirked. Backing jacks, that's what we call them guys. Backing jacks waste time, stretch their toes across the whole river, backing and trying to line up for the next bend. Them's cub pilots like you. You got to drive a bend, son. Kind of like a car and a skid. Got to let go of the brakes, put the hammer down on them 3,000 horses, and steer through it. Also, maybe hope there's nobody around the corner. Red smiled. Look here, Cubby, he continued. You might as well come over and join us. You might learn a thing or two. So I grabbed my grain belt and I moved over and met the pilots of the Sadie Mae, the Mike Harris, the Itasca, and the Bull Durham. The waitress came by and stood next to Big Red, who clasped her tiny hand in his mighty paw and then released into it a $100 bill. Sweetie, I want you to fill the top of this round table with open Budweiser bottles till you can't see the top no more. Then kindly go away, because we don't want no interrupting, as we got some cards to play and some stories to tell, and it's been one long day on the river. Then he looked over at me and winked. Ain't that right there, Cubby, he said, just light enough not to hurt me. My newfound friend punched me on the shoulder. So, 3 years ago, I started a novel based on this character, and it's been one of the most amazing experiences of my life writing it. I've started other novels before. I've written nonfiction books, a book published by Time Warner in the 90s, and Mermaids, but I've never gone through with a novel, and it's an extraordinary process that you just I don't see how anyone can write a good novel in under 2 or maybe 3 years, because each part of it takes so long to mature, and I don't know, it's really hard to explain, but one of the real treats and blessings of being a writer is that you in a way you get to play God. You can create characters and reshape them, and when they work, you're as close to truth as you'll ever get. And so this has been, that book that came out of Big Red has been a great voyage, and it should come out in December. So.
No way.
What?
No way. Next December.
No,
A year
this
from
December. We're not going to have a domestic discussion. I'm at 90,000 words as of yesterday, which is almost 300 pages. Does anyone have any questions? I hope. Yes.
How much, in terms of writing a novel, do you have to stick to a formula and, tried and true? Because when you read a book, oh, he's going to shun her and she's going to chase after him. I mean, there's certain formulas. How much do you feel you have to stick to that, and how much do you shake it up?
Well, first of all, I think that any good novel is really about the characters, and the plot is secondary. It's nice if you have an alluring plot. In a lot of popular books, you know, like Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train and those kind of things are plot driven. They're not character driven. That's not the way I write. I started this book about a year after I finished understanding the plot of the whole thing. So that's the way I worked. I had the plot in pieces as it developed, and I knew when I had it, which was about a couple years ago, and then what I had to do at that point was I had to let it move. E.L. Doctorow, a novelist, had a great quote, and he said, writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You just have to follow the headlights. You're not going to see very far, but if you keep following them, you'll get there. And one of the things that's been surprising to me is you advance in the plot, and then so now you're bringing another character to support something, and suddenly you've got to make that character real, and you've got to build in at least a part of that character's backstory. And the next thing you know, you sense another tributary that will really add value to two characters before, and it just goes on and on and on. And you know, I suppose there's different approaches that people take. In my case, I've evolved from 25 years old thinking I was Ernest Hemingway to not thinking anything, and having to have everything just right, and a writing studio and this lined up, to now you just give me a pen and find me some paper, and that's pretty much how I work. And I'm getting a little off your point, but what I like about longhand writing is, to me, it feels as if it's just coming right out of me, and especially if it's a really nice pen that flows well, it comes out. And the problem to me with writing on a computer is you're looking at blinking things, and you're concentrating on the delete button, and you know, it's not the way to go.
The flow gets lost.
Yeah, yeah. Any
Is that how you started? Were all these written longhand?
I think it's a combination of things. When I started, they didn't even have computers. When I started, the last sale I wrote on a typewriter on a boat. That's a long story, but and then I polished them, and a number of these stories have been published. Probably 75% of the stories in this book have been published, and some of them, 3 of them, won a Best of Show and Arts Festival, and they were published, and they've shown up in different places. But the interesting thing is that one of the reasons I wanted to put the Mermaid book together was really I really wanted to get some practice and build up some more credibility before I wrote this novel, which is something that's a real thing with me. And I didn't really expect the Mermaid book to go anywhere. As a matter of fact, the Mermaid book is kind of a hybrid in publishing. It's sponsored by Points East Magazine, which is a magazine I write for. But it's really self-published. And the summer before last, the publisher of Macmillan was in Marblehead and picked up the Mermaid book at the bookstore, and was impressed with it. And so I went to New York to meet with him, and we had a really interesting discussion about self-publishing versus traditional publishing, which is something that people are very interested in. And he told me that your average self-published book grosses about $500. And he was trying to talk me into traditional publishing, and I learned that I had so much freedom with this book. When Time Warner published my first book, I didn't have any freedom. They changed the title, they did the marketing plan, they changed it. I just didn't have any freedom at all to promote it. And I felt this was such a great experience. So he said to me, he said, "Yeah, so that's the deal with self-publishing books." And he said, well, how many of these did you sell? And I said, well, 14,000. What? And then he said, well, maybe you should just go with that. And so that's kind of the route that I'm thinking of taking with this next book. Yes?
Are the stories all true? Or
That's the best question. This happens every time. Yeah. This is a little game that I like to play. There are 5 stories in this book that ain't true. Okay, so let's go, folks. Those of you that read it.
Let's say fiction, not.
Okay, let's just say fiction.
Well, are they based on some truth?
They're all based on, yeah, of course. But I mean, everything's fiction, right? I mean, nothing's exactly the way it is. So,
All right, well, the easy one is you didn't die.
right, and there's a caveat in the beginning of that, right? I mean, I say in the beginning of that.
Yeah.
That's the story in the Gulf Stream about the fella that falls overboard in the Gulf Stream, and he basically watches his existence dwindle away. So that's one.
The story on the One Order of Paradise to Go, a couple of romantic dreamers who hired you to start them with the first leg of their journey.
Oh, that was hilarious.
That is
That's the
absolutely
first half of
1000% true, except for the names.
But they must know who they are, right?
Yeah, well, a little aside about that. That was originally published. I forget what the title of that is in the book, but when it was the first
What is
published,
the title?
Cruising World did a feature on that story, and they'd never seen anything like it. I sent it in unsolicited.
Did you have photos of the Hoover?
Oh, they hired an artist for Cruising World for the story, and they did Natalie with the go-go boots and the vacuum and the 2 little dogs. And the editor of Cruising World, which was really a popular magazine at the time when they bought this, called me up and said, "Did this happen?" I said, "Yeah, it happened. I wouldn't write it for a boating magazine if it didn't happen. I changed the names and so that anyway that
Did they ever call you?
no, they didn't. Yeah.
Sorry, this is the pair who you got about 25
Well, you
miles
went to
offshore.
Connecticut or something.
Oh, we were way off.
The
No,
land disappeared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right,
And
and
the two
she's
of them were
screaming.
sweaty and said,
Yeah.
"Go home."
Yeah.
That was a great story.
for those of you that haven't read it, this just quickly. This is the story that I used to deliver boats, and I got a phone call from a yacht broker saying there's this couple down in Rhode Island that's bought a boat and they're going to sail around the world, but they're a little nervous about the first leg or any leg. So will you take them down to Norfolk from Rhode Island? So I said, yeah, okay, sure. So I showed up there, and I called it a seagoing Winnebago. This was a boat that should not have crossed your little inlet here. And so I got aboard and slept aboard the night before, and the next morning about 400 relatives of Natalie and Jim climbed aboard with big boxes of Dunkin' Donuts, which is not what you want to eat when you go offshore. And they gobbled them down, and Jim was terrified. Jim had just was holding on to everything like this. He knew that he didn't know anything. And then there was, of course, Sasha and Tasha. Now, Sasha and Tasha are these 2 little dogs with pink ribbons in their hair. And then there was Natalie, Sasha and Tasha's mother there. And Sasha and Tasha didn't take a liking to me and kept nipping at my ankle, which really hurt. So as I said in the story, I was planning that maybe in the dark of night offshore there might be a little accident. So we left the dock and headed out, and it was a center cockpit boat, so the master cabin was actually under the center cockpit. And
Big boat.
there was this crash on the cockpit floor under us, cockpit sole. And I said to Jim, "What's that?" And meanwhile, this boat, it was like the steering wheel was made with rubber bands. It was just, whoa, this isn't right. And we're going downwind, okay, which is the only reason we made it that far, about 70 miles, I think. And Jim said, "Oh, that's Natalie. She takes the lamp and she bangs on the overhead when she wants me to come down." So I have to backtrack quickly. Is when we were leaving the harbor, we're headed offshore, and I heard this other strange noise, this whirring sound. And I said to Jim, "What is that?" And I looked down below, and there's Natalie with a Hoover vacuum, vacuuming the shag carpet as we're headed offshore. If you're a sailor, that's not the last thing you think about doing. So Natalie, that's when Natalie came up on deck, and she looked around, and of course we're offshore. She says, "Where's the land? Where's the goddamn land?" And she's looking along. I said, "Well, Natalie, it's there. You just can't see it, you know." So anyway, the things got worse, and then about an hour later, there was that same knock on the bottom of the cockpit floor, and Natalie came up, and she had on this, I'll never forget, this light blue fur-lined rhinestone jacket with a hood, and the go-go boots, and patent leather go-go boots, and Sasha and Tasha tucked under the jacket, like this and this. And the three of them came up on deck, and Natalie was green, and all of a sudden I heard this, and Tasha threw up on Sasha, and then Sasha threw up on Natalie, and then Natalie threw up. Down she went in the cabin. Meanwhile, Nick, Jim, the owners, is like this, you know, and then all of a sudden there's boom, boom, boom. Jim said, "Oh, that's Natalie again." He went down below. And he came up, and I'll never forget, he stood in the middle of the hatch, and he said, I said, "What is it now, Jim?" He said, "Natalie wants to turn around." Oh, by the way, I should add, these people had quit both their jobs, sold their house, sold both their cars, and canceled their marina store. They had cut all ties, and they'd never been offshore. So I looked at the following seas, you know. I said, "You want to turn around? You want to go 70 miles into this?" He said, "Yep." It had a big, huge engine, and I said, "Okay, hang on." And we went back, and we got back to the marina that they didn't have anymore, and tied up in a transient space. And I said to Jim, "Let's go down in the cabin and drink a bottle of rum and talk about this." And so we did, and that's when I first wrote this, and I wrote it as an essay. And Cruising World said, "This is not good for boating cruising, Dave. We really can't. This is a really cogent essay that maybe people will go, yeah, maybe I don't want to get a sailboat."
Right.
So they had me change it, and I turned it into that humorous piece. The other stories that are not, what did you say, that are
fiction.
That are fiction, thank you, dear. Well, we'll leave the mermaids off to the side for a minute, but one of them that takes place right on Route 127 coming up the shore, Somewhat of a Wizard. It's the only dirty story, romantic one, about the young man and the married woman in the big house.
And the Rolls Royce.
Snapping back Rebecca bottom.
Oh dear, I was afraid of that.
You wanted that to be.
You wanted that to be real, didn't you? So did I. But it wasn't. And I can't remember what are the other ones.
I don't know, the skinny dipping.
Oh my gosh, that's true. Yeah, that was
You guys are just
behind her
naked, frolicking in the sea.
a quick thing on that. That's called Behind Her Mona Lisa Smile. And when I was 17 years old, all I wanted to do was sail around the world, and it didn't seem possible at that point, since I only had $1,500 in a little 23-foot little cabin sailboat. So my mom and dad said, well, when we sail down to the islands, meaning Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, you come along with us and we'll watch you, and that'll be the voyage. So I went down in my boat and they went down theirs, and we made it all to Nantucket together. And then I said, well, I want to go off on my own. I'm going to go to Hyannis, because I've got some buddies from school that are in Hyannis in the middle of the summer, and I was a teenager. So I started sailing from Nantucket across the sound to Hyannis and got totally lost in the fog. And finally I followed a dragger in, and I made it in, and contacted my friends and went ashore to a party. And the next day my friend told me that I must have had some beer or something, because I didn't remember. But my friend told me that I invited this girl named Karen out sailing on Saturday. Oh, and by the way, I was supposed to be keeping in touch with my parents every day from a phone, and there were no cell phones, of course, but from a telephone, and I sort of forgot to do any of that. And so they had lost track of me for 3 or 4 days at this point. They hadn't heard from me. So Karen showed up, and we went out behind that island outside of Hyannis, and you'd have to read the story, but she was 22 and I was 17. And I told her I was a college student, and she said, what college? And my brother went to Union, so it was the only college I knew about. I said, Union College. She said, okay. And fortunately she didn't question me any further. So I dropped her off, and the next day, and I got decided to call my brother Skip, who lived in Plymouth, to tell him I wasn't far, for Hyannis from Plymouth, and he's my 8 years older than I am, and my big brother. And so I said, he said, well, Holly, which was his fiance at the time, she and I will drive down and we'll meet you, we'll take you to dinner. So they came to Hyannis, and we went to a Chinese restaurant and had dinner, okay? And that was the end of that. Went back to the boat, and the next day, my parents called Skip, my brother, and they said, are you sitting down? And Skip said, yeah, what is it? He said, we have some really sad news. Your little brother is lost at sea. We've called the Coast Guard, there's been an air search, blah, blah, blah. And we didn't want to tell anybody until now. And Skip said, I just had dinner with him in a Chinese restaurant yesterday. So I got in real trouble. That was and all the way back from the Cape, back to Marblehead in this little boat. My parents knew people in every harbor, Quissit and Falmouth along the way. I'd see his friends and I'd say, hi, Mr. Hitchcock. Just because I didn't do a good thing by not keeping in touch. And Karen wasn't even really worth it. So. Any other questions? Would anybody like to hear one more piece, or what do you want to do? Anybody have any ideas of something that they read? Yes.
How did you, what kind of an organizing thing did you find to have all these?
Well, finally, I sort of broke it down into the youth section, to the middle age, to older age, and I tried fiddling around with title systems and all this stuff, and that just didn't work. That was the hardest part of putting this together, was taking all these stories and trying to put them. Oh, I know what I'd love to read this. This is short too. This is called Bound to Boats in Life, and it's a good way to for me to get off your stage here. He broke his right hip when he was 87. He was lifting the battery out of Coda, his last and final boat, which was tied to the dock at the end of a pier. He slipped and fell, refusing to let go of the battery. No one was around. So he dragged himself up the gangway and to his car, pulled his cell phone out of the glove compartment, and called an ambulance. When I heard him relate this story to me that night, especially the part of not letting go of the battery, It brought me back to one late summer day in 1960 when Dad and I were walking down the Hingham Yacht Club float toward the little boat that we'd built together. We passed a boy about my age struggling to carry his small outboard towards his own skiff. He slipped and fell off the float. In an instant, he was gone. It was low tide, and there was only about 4 feet of water where he fell. Still, he went under and didn't come up. Dad got down on his knees and reached underwater, felt around, finally grabbed one of his arms and started to pull him up. "Need help," he said. "He won't come up." But just then, the small boy shot to the surface, and Dad pulled him onto the float. He blinked at us, coughing, while water cascaded off his soaking clothes. "You were stuck down in there underwater somehow," my dad said finally. "Not stuck," the little boy said. "I was hanging on. I didn't want to let go of my motor." He peered down into the muddy water, a devastated look on his shivering face. "My outboard," he said. "I was hanging onto the outboard down there on the bottom, but when you pulled me up, it made me let go, and now it's gone." It was, no doubt, one of the boy's first lessons in how suddenly things can change for the worst. Dad broke his other hip 6 years later when he was 93. He was headed to his den, missed the step, and landed on the floor under the half model of the boat he'd spent his honeymoon on 68 years before. This half model of Phyllis, the old family cruising cutter, hangs on the wall next to a framed blueprint of her line drawings. Around both of these are many pictures taken during Phyllis's best days. Days when the old sailor and his boat were young, when Phyllis's youth kept the planks and ribs resilient to the turbulent and rolling seas. He may have suspected at the time that his left hip was broken, but he didn't call anyone. Not wanting to be a burden, he lay there under the half model, then finally decided to pull himself up, broken hip and all, work his way upstairs, find some bandages for the cut on his arm that came from the fall, and go to bed. "I'm done," Dad told me he'd said aloud in the empty house that night. "Call Dr. Kevorkian. Get the angels ready. I've had enough and I'm headed up." He wasn't. I'm writing this now at my dad's house and thinking of how I and others have to cope. We have little training in coping, yet something seems to be built in. Not long ago, I reconnected with a middle-aged friend of mine who had lost his lovely wife to cancer. I was facing the devastation of both my life and hers, and I seemed to have come to have no coping mechanisms, he told me. Then he tilted his head and looked lost in thought, and a little puzzled. So I began to build a strip-planked canoe. I don't know why I knew to turn that way, I just did. Anyway, it kept me sane and focused on something at a time when the ground was leaving my feet. The family home is empty now, while Dad is in rehab. There's not a sound except for the grandfather clock that he built years ago. Its pendulum squeaks a bit while it swings through its arc. But the old clock still goes on, though it can't keep time. Behind my chair in the big bay window are 2 plexiglass cases. Each one contains a boat model, one of the Phyllis and the other of the Eastward, the trawler that my parents covered 35,000 miles in after Dad retired. But what's important to me now is why the models came to be. I think back more than a decade ago when my mom was bedridden for 3 years after a stroke. Dad was her caregiver. It was a lot to undertake for an 83-year-old, but he never complained. Instead, as a relief from caring for Mom, he began to build these models of Phyllis and Eastwood. He started from scratch with a stack of soft pine boards he'd glued together. From there he hollowed out, carved, and faired the hulls, built all the rigging, and made fully detailed cabin interiors with miniature fixtures to match the real boats, right down to a tiny needlepoint pillow that read, "Screw the golden years." On the cabin top of each, he substituted clear plastic so the viewer could look down into the 2-foot-long cabins at all the details. Just before he sealed off the cabin top on the Eastward, With its skylight, he placed a thimble-sized silver urn on the port bunk. "Put a few of my ashes in that someday, will you, pal?" he said to me. I wander into the attached garage. The nutshell pram that I built years ago is stored in there. It needs attention. The plywood transom has delaminated, and the whole boat cries for fresh paint. The plan years ago had been to build it with my 2 kids, the way Dad and I had built my skiff when I was little. My kids, now grown, hadn't participated much though. They'd had busy lives as budding teenagers, so I built it alone, once in a while showing them my progress and attracting a vague or token interest. But I knew, deep down, it set in. I knew that the seeds were planted. Someday, when amidst their own trials of life and of loss, my hope is that something in them, such as the idea of building a boat, will allow them to come up with an alternative to despair. In the garage, I spot an old boat cushion on the floor and a sanding block nearby. I kneel down on the cushion and begin to sand the delaminated transom in readiness for yet another season. Somehow, it just seems like the right thing to do. So, thank you very much.